Hi, I'm Terry Smoka. I'm the Instructional Technology Specialist here at Concord Carlisle. Today I'm here with Craig Carpenter. He is a school psychologist at CCHS, and today he's here to talk with us about his work with students who suffer from social emotional issues and some things that we can do as general educators to help those students with their problems. So Craig, do you want to talk a little bit about the type of students you work with?
Yeah, sure. So I work in the alternative program, which is CCHS's most restrictive therapeutic setting, meaning that students that come to us have usually tried a variety of different supports before getting to us. Within the program, we offer an English class, a history class, group counseling, individual counseling, study skills support, and health and fitness with some students. So really, the idea is for kids that really have a hard time getting to school and getting out into their classes, it's a good fit for them because so much of their education is happening within the program.
Within the program itself, so teachers come down to their classroom as opposed to the students going into another space.
Correct, for some of the classes.
For some of the classes, excellent. Okay, so you work with Alt-Pro, which, as you mentioned, is the one that is the most comprehensive therapy. Can you talk a little bit about some of the other programs that we have here at CCHS and the kind of students that might be involved in those programs?
Yeah, that's a really good question because we do have a few social emotional support programs, and I'm sure for the people that aren't working directly on them, it can be confusing. So we have Lighthouse, which is a program for students who have had an extended absence from school, not necessarily for social emotional reasons, though we would have social emotional concerns for any student who's been out of school that long. I'm sure it's a hard adjustment no matter what, but students in that program could also have been out for medical reasons. There's students who have come back from cancer, students coming back from mono, students that are struggling with school refusal. So a wide range of different challenges there.
That's Lighthouse, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And the idea is with Lighthouse, it's a transitionary program. So students are, typically we would expect within 6 to 8 weeks for them to be back on track and in their mainstream classes.
Okay.
If those students need ongoing support, that's when we would start to look at a special education referral.
Okay.
And part of the special education restructure that we did this past year really identified those students, the students that don't quite need the level of support of the alternative program, but we're needing ongoing support through Lighthouse. Was an area of need, so that's where the Harbor program came about.
Okay.
So Harbor is a special education program. There are no classes currently within the program, but there's group counseling, individual counseling, and study skills support, and an academic teacher there to support as well. And it's sort of been a nice transitionary program for identifying students' needs and really keeping good data on what support they need. So when students in Harbor are they're doing okay in Harbor but are having a hard time getting out to their classes,
Right.
That's when we would start to look at maybe a referral to the alternative program.
Okay, good. And I mean, my brief look at them, it feels like they're kind of a safe space for kids. Lighthouse and Harbor, if the student is in a class and they're struggling, they're able to go into those two spaces as a safe spot for them where they can get support.
Yeah, they're all three are different communities, but they all want to serve as sort of a home base for students who are struggling, and they could feel comfortable going there at any time.
Okay. So talk a little bit about the students that you work with. What characteristics will general education classroom teachers see working with the vast array of students that you guys are working with?
Yeah, it can be really varied. It's usually the students that are getting to us, what they all have in common is that they've just struggled universally in school, and no support has been quite significant enough to help them make progress.
Okay.
So it can look very different from student to student. We have some students who are in the middle of a major depressive episode, and just getting to school and getting them to class is requires a monumental effort.
Yeah.
Some students who really struggle with anxiety and perfectionism, and getting them also to go to classes and take tests and get work done and turn in physical proof of their work can be really anxiety provoking for them. We have students with trauma backgrounds and manifesting as behavioral challenges and some attentional challenges. So really it's very different from student to student.
That's interesting. So can you kind of give me some ideas about What's the biggest struggle that these students face? You kind of touched on that a little bit.
I think the biggest struggle that they all universally face is feeling like they're a part of a community. Because I think, throughout their schooling experience, they've felt like school is not a place where they can feel successful.
Okay.
And school has just never felt like a good place for them. So they're all struggling to sort of renegotiate their identity as students in a school context.
Okay. And you mentioned that that the students are very different, and based on where they're coming from, that they have different things that show in the classroom. So can you kind of explain what some of those things might be, and what the general education classroom teacher how they might respond to some of those kind of typical things that they might see from students that you work with?
Yeah. Again, that could be really varied. With some of the more behavioral students, you could see outward defiance around limit setting. You could see students really looking to engage you in a power struggle, whether it be over allowing them to go to the bathroom or taking a break, things of that nature, negotiating deadlines, extended deadlines on assignments. For some of the more anxious students, I think you would see real challenge getting work in, challenges getting to class, sort of more of the escape avoidance from class.
Okay. Because of their anxiety levels.
Correct. And also some students you might just not see for a few days.
Well, some of them have some issues that are very debilitating and quite critical in nature, so that would be something that you would expect. When we had our conversation before, though, you talked a little bit about the students who are behavioral students, who's maybe the reason for these students probably aren't in your Alt-Pro program, but they might be in the Lighthouse program, where they're kind of in a school refusal mode. So can you talk a little bit about students who kind of are coming from that place? They really are kind of done with school. They really don't want to be there. What kind of strategies would you suggest teachers use with students who are coming from that particular place?
Yeah, so we certainly work with that as well in the alternative program, and I think for those students, you have to be creative, and the team of adults working with them really has to be aligned. So that's when homeschool communication is really key, and that's not just between mental health providers and home. I think that can come from teachers as well, and several of my coworkers have cited excellent examples of teachers really going out of their way and being creative and engaging students who are having a hard time getting to school. But it's really it's a whole family issue when a student is refusing to get to school, so really working with the family and supporting the student getting there is critical.
Excellent. Do you find that with students from different, coming from different places, that there's any routines or strategies that the classroom teacher does that helps them feel more comfortable when they're trying to redefine themselves as a student and kind of trying to make school a more secure place for them? And do you find anything that you see that some teachers doing that you would say that helps your students? Yeah,
for sure. And I think, as I talked about before, I think all of the answers are here. All of the teachers have really great practices that they're employing, and I think the more time that we can spend all together talking with each other about what's working for us and what's not, the more shared knowledge we can have. But I think when teachers are really clear about their expectations and can reinforce those consistently, I think really helps to create a culture where the kids know what to expect when they get there, and
where the line is.
Right, and especially for kids with more troubling backgrounds, that consistency and predictability could be more beneficial for them than you would ever know, and more than they could ever actually be aware of. So. Being very clear with your expectations and following through on them is key. I've seen a lot of different practices of teachers, like for instance, Ben Kendall, I know, has asked students to fill out different about me worksheets. And not only that, but the students that have spoken to me about it have said that he really studies that information, and it comes up in conversation, and he asks them about their weekend, and the students feel like their teacher really knows them as a person and not just as a student.
So kind of the feeling that he really does he took the time to get to know them, to ask them some questions, and he's really interested in them as an individual.
Absolutely, and I know Bela Pratt has her students fill out sort of their identity flags, and students can talk about their cultural identities and their interests, and she actually posts them through her classroom, so students really feel represented within the classroom.
Okay.
And there's countless examples, as I've said, of practices like this across the school. I think that something that we should always be considering when students are struggling to engage in our class, there's this formula, and not to reduce student struggles to a formula, but we talk about motivation all the time. Some students are just unmotivated.
Yeah.
And if we unpack that word a little bit, I've heard it explained to me as motivation is a student's expectation of success by their value placed in the activity. So if either one of those is off, it's hard to engage students if they're not feeling like they can be successful in what you're asking them to do, or if they don't have a lot of value in what they're doing, then you might see them disengage, and it's our job as educators to figure out how to sort of correct that a bit.
Engage them. Excellent. So what types of supports do you guys put in, what kind of things do you put in place in your programs so that that maybe the general education classroom teacher knows, you always do a schedule with them, a paper schedule, or you have a certain routine or something that you put in place so that they know about that kind of thing that you do with students, and they can talk to the students about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we are not perfect in the alternative program, and we've definitely had our share of, not meeting our expectations. And this is my first year in the alternative program, and I've learned a lot this year. Especially
it's a tough place. It's a very tough place.
Yeah, especially the suggestion that I gave around being consistent with and clear with your expectations. So I think moving forward, that's an area of focus for us. Like very specifically how a student takes a test, how they use their extended time, where they can go for tests, what type of clarification they can ask for. And I think we're going to work a little bit harder to just have clear expectations of what community values are and what expectations are of students in the space.
Excellent. Is there any suggestions that you would make to general education teachers? I mean, they are, as you mentioned, we're very blessed to have a lot of really highly skilled teachers, but if they are having a struggle with somebody in alt-pro or within one of the other social emotional programs, the student is challenging them, or they're kind of getting into a power struggle. If I don't know if that's the correct word. Yeah. Are there any strategies or things that you would recommend the classroom teacher to kind of think about using?
Yeah, of course, and we've certainly felt that with some students when you're in the midst of a power struggle and you're feeling really defensive and you're bringing something to an interaction and they're bringing some emotional energy to the interaction can be really difficult, and sometimes it's hard to work through those situations in the moment, and those are really situations that we need to be reflecting on more. So I think it's important for us to think about what our classroom standards and expectations are, and where they fall in terms of priorities and why they are priorities to us, so we can sort of know where and when we can compromise in the classroom, and what we want to hold strong to and what we can be a little more flexible for the sake of getting along a little bit better with the students. So
do you feel like that is something that is teacher by teacher? Some teachers have strong feelings one way or the other, and do you have some suggestions where that's concerned?
Yeah, I think every teacher has their own unique set of expectations in the classroom, and they certainly should. I think that as long as we're just engaging in reflective practice around what they are and why they are, and how those expectations intersect with a student's current functioning and needs, which is pretty dynamic and can change even day to day. So I think that it's not a single person decision how to support a student in the classroom, and it's certainly not solely a mental health professional's decision. I think it needs to be a team one, and there's just so much good, valuable information to be shared across different people that are working with students.
I think that's true. I think too, it seems like, I think you and I had a previous conversation where you mentioned it's good if the classroom teacher kind of prioritizes, these are my I'm not going to, these are my things I have to have.
My non-negotiables.
These are my
yeah.
non-negotiables. These are my things that, okay. And so based on what the classroom teacher's non-negotiables, and it can be a little flexible here, and then paired with the student and what their situation is, that can be a very important piece of information for classroom teachers to bring to the conversation.
Yeah, of course. And I think, we'll experience such unique student circumstances that we'll even have to question what our non-negotiables are.
Yeah.
What is the overarching goal for student learning in our classes, and how do we get students there? Because you're going to have some students who might be gone for a few weeks, and we need to figure out what to do with them.
Yeah.
So as long as we can just keep that in mind, what is our goal for them to take from this class?
Okay. Excellent. And I think maybe you probably kind of touched on this. What's your suggestion for handling like late work and things like that? Because as you mentioned with the social emotional students, they are going to have times that they miss.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think again that's a dynamic question as well that needs to be. I mean, we've developed certainly several plans for students, but those plans are just that, plans, and they can be altered and renegotiated as well. I think flexibility is key in working with students with social emotional challenges. Some days you might have a student in your class where you really just might not have any idea how hard it is for them to be there. The other side of the coin, we have students with extreme anxiety, and we know that accommodating anxiety is not usually what's best for students that are struggling with that. So it's really an ongoing discussion, and every plan looks different for every student. And I think it's how to manage that tension as a classroom teacher. I mean, I have all the respect in the world for classroom teachers because
you and me both.
You're managing 6 billion things at once. But how do you have sort of overarching expectations for your class, and then flexibility for student to student, and an understanding of what's going on with each student is quite the task.
And also in our other conversation, one thing you said that really struck a chord with me is you'd mentioned that there were several classroom teachers who had, of their own volition, and certainly not an expectation, had come down into the Alt Pro learning space, into the Harbor learning space, into the Lighthouse learning space, just to see the student, meet with the student, and that, can you tell me a little bit about what you felt like the student reaction was to that?
Yeah, we certainly have several teachers that'll come down into the space if they haven't seen a student for a while, and just to check on them or to make a plan with them. And it just goes such a long way in so many different ways. I think a lot of time the students in the alternative program feel so different from the rest of the school, and that's understandable. They're in a separate program, and they've experienced a lot of challenges in their academic careers. And to see a teacher come into their space as opposed to them having to go to the teacher just goes a long way. And saying, I see you, I recognize you, and I recognize that you're struggling, and I'm here to help because that's okay.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even have to be a wonderful creative plan. I've had teachers come down and say the same plan that I've said to a student in the alternative program space, and
suddenly it's brilliant.
Right, and then it's a great idea.
And they buy in, and it's great.
And they believe they can do it.
That's awesome. Well, that's a big part of it, confidence in that they can do it. Is there anything else that you would like to share with teachers about your programs and how they run, and just anything at all?
Not specifically about programming, but something that I think I left out, just a technical piece of advice for teachers supporting students. We talked about instructional mismatch, and I've shared that at faculty meetings as well, where that's really where we should start our search for what's going on with a student in class. If you're following the problem-solving model of why something isn't going the way you expect it to in class, what is the problem, why is it happening, we should really be looking at the instructional match as the first thing to rule out, at least, in terms of why things aren't going well. And there's really simple ways to do it. We measure in special education evaluations oral reading fluency, but that's really oral reading fluency of how fast does an average 10th grader read this specific passage, and more meaningful reading fluency is how fluently can a student read curriculum-based readings.
Okay.
So there's norms on the internet for what you would expect to see normal reading fluency, and I think it probably goes undetected so much, where students just aren't quite able to access the grade level reading required for courses, and we just don't really have any idea. We could have some inkling because we're not seeing super thoughtful responses on homework or on assessments, but we've never really identified like maybe text is too hard for students, and same thing with basic math skills and basic writing skills. So really looking at instructional match should be the first thing that we can rule out.
Okay, good. And we did, for the first time this year, we did, put an initial math and English language arts test to give. We did give that to all the freshmen. Right. So hopefully, I'm quite sure they're doing that again. So hopefully that kind of information can assist us in the future. But instructional mismatch, meaning that the student just does not, at this time, have the academic toolkit and ability to actually fully access the curriculum in the way that will make it meaningful to them.
Right, and just because a student has intact basic skills in one class does not mean that they generalize to another. Someone might have a harder time fluently comprehending biology texts than they do literature. So just being mindful of that, and really just having that more curious lens as to why students are struggling, and a drive to get to the root of what might be going on.
Well, that makes complete and total sense. Okay. Well, Craig, I can't thank you enough for coming. I really can't, and giving your time twice to me. One the first time, and then we decided to record it. I think it will be really helpful to classroom teachers to understand a little bit more about what you do on your end and the thoughtful things that that they can help do, and together we can hopefully help these students who are struggling so hard.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and to the teachers, we're here to support, and you do so much supporting students and so much of what we ask you to do, and we're here to support you as well. So if you have any concerns or you're looking for more support, we're happy to help you out as well.
Okay, thank you.